Physical security is a brutally competitive industry. Most companies look the same, act the same, and charge the same price. Will Duke did things differently, and when it came time to sell, buyers lined up. He didn't just exit the core business. Along the way, Will built an internal software platform to manage and track thousands of security devices for customers. And that platform eventually became its own SaaS company, and both businesses were sold as a part of the same exit at roughly double the market value. In this episode, we're going to break down how he differentiated from a crowded market, what actually mattered during the sale, and his repeatable process for investing smartly after the exit. If you want to understand what actually drives valuation and why buyers are willing to pay a premium, this episode is definitely worth your time. Let's dive in. Will Duke, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here.
So you had a business that you built for 20 years. What experience do you think you get from building a business that long that serial entrepreneurs don't, who are kind of jumping from thing to thing, selling and moving on?
In the beginning, you go from how do we stay in business? You're doing everything. And then as you grow the company, you have to develop teams and people. And then there's just different problems, bigger problems. But from a serial entrepreneur, if you're in and out of companies, you never get a full chance to develop people. We had probably 5 or 6 people that were with us for 15 or 16 years. Those are important relationships to me.
I think the relationship building part of it's a big part of it. The other thing that I think of is if you're moving through things in, 2 to 4 years or 2 to 5 years and then selling and moving on, and I guess it probably depends on scale, but it's very likely that you've figured out how to navigate around a problem. And I think when you're in it for a really long time, maybe you have more depth in the understanding. I don't know. I've been in something for 15 years also. So like, I don't really know the other side of the coin.
Well, you definitely, I definitely say for like the first 10 years, we pretty much just bought ourselves a job. Like we were learning how to do business. At that point, we hadn't really gotten in any groups before Vistage or Strategic Coach. We didn't know how to put a rhythm or a vision or a roadmap. We were just selling stuff and installing stuff. And then we're like, well, if we're going to do this, let's make money. And so it was like the second 10 years, it was like, how do we build a company that actually can build, wealth for myself and my business partner. And then also, how can our people succeed along the way? So
you kind of just answered this then, but I want some nuance to it. Yesterday, you told me it's been 3 years since the exit, and now I'm itching to do something again.
I am, yeah.
How did you keep yourself engaged for 20 years in the same company? And you said basically the beginning, you were just sort of learning, stumbling through it. And then the next 10 years, you were trying to build something and make money. What was engaging to you through that process, and what helped kind of get from one level to the next?
In our world, considered a VAR, value-added reseller. Like we sold electronic security. So we sold and installed stuff that our competitors also sold and installed at basically the same price. So the only thing we could change is the experience. And I would attribute probably the last 6 years of our existence, I was in Strategic Coach, let's say 5.5 years. That group really helped me elevate my thinking and how to deliver our product in a different way that got not only our team involved, but the customers involved. Really changed my perspective massively.
Tell me about that process. What did you do to get the customers involved, and what does that mean?
So we really took an approach, even more so like the last 4 years, of creating like collaboration workshops. We build out 5-year roadmaps. We would have people come into our office. It could be C-suite to individual contributor. We put them all in the same room together, and we'd ask them, what are you guys trying to achieve? Where are you trying to go? And we'd help them kind of paint a 5-year roadmap. And our competitors never did that. They were just trying to sell stuff. We were actually trying to help them.
Yeah. So to that end, when I hear that, I think that there's some parallels with, selling payment processing functionally. But like when I hear that, I think, what customer wants to come in and talk to you about their roadmap for digital security? Was that the starting point? Is that why you hadn't done it before? Like, how do you
Well,
reconcile that?
so I think it's just like anything, right? You're just like, I think this is a good idea. Let's try it. I would always tell our team, we don't get to skip down the hallways unless our clients are skipping down the hallways first. And so we did it. Our very first client, our largest client, HEB, grocery store here in Texas, they came in, we worked with them. They loved it, which was a little bit of a risk because I'm like, man, if they hate it, maybe it wasn't that big of a risk, but if they hate it, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, it was a decent idea, but they loved it. And I think they loved it because nobody ever asked them those questions before. And we had large commercial clients and pretty much all of them loved it.
Let me get some details on that because I think one of the challenges for certainly new entrepreneurs, but even established entrepreneurs, is sort of taking a concept that somebody else has applied in their business and trying to map it onto your own. And when you look at the large strategic concepts, that becomes very difficult, murky area in the actual execution where you think, okay, that's a great idea, but how would I apply that to me? So I think a little background on what the company was selling specifically, digital security, what that means, and then what that process looked like would be helpful for people to map on.
Yeah. So we sold and installed. You go into any large institution that has thousands of people going through it. So school districts, universities, grocery stores, but it was uh, video surveillance, access control, the hardware, the software, the cable, all the components, connecting it all together, plugging into the switch, and then bringing it online. I took elements of my time at Vistage, my time at Strategic Coach. We also used EOS uh, by Gino Wickman. I took elements of all three of those programs and said, how could we package this in a manner that our clients could possibly resonate with? And it really came down to, as long as we make it all about our clients and helping them achieve their goals, the premise was they might buy more from us. And so I think the product is almost irrelevant in this case. It's how you make it all about your client, and then how do you involve your team along the way? Because I didn't want to be the one like pushing this thing. It was my idea, but it had to be a team approach. Otherwise, I would die. It would be so much energy, right? But
Yeah.
the approach is really, where are people now? Where do they want to go? And what's keeping them from achieving those goals? Like just basic goal setting 101. And if you sit down and ask clients, where are you now and where are you trying to go, and you help them get there, I mean, that's worked in the past. It works today. It'll work until the end of time, in my opinion. I think those are timeless principles.
So I'm thinking, and I want to double click a little further because uh, at a glance, and I think this is true of almost all businesses, you look at just the top level, what's the product or service being delivered, right? And so to me, uh, let's say I own a hotel and I've got, 40 cameras, or I've got a few hotels and I've got 400 cameras. Um, and I'm thinking, what do I want? I want to be able to see things all across the property, and I want to be able to have access control so that certain people can get into certain doors. That's it. And I don't want it to be a pain in the ass. So how do you take that fundamental deliverable and expand that into sort of the client vision and the client being engaged and creating more of an emotional connection to the problem and the outcome?
It's a good question. So historically, physical security has been a reactive thing.
Hmm.
Something bad happens, you go to the tapes, pull it up, bring in the authorities. And so we started using AI probably back in 2016, 2017. The top tier manufacturers would put it in their product. And so what it allowed us to do is, how do we look for predictive behaviors on the front end before they happen? So more of a proactive manner. And
Mm.
we were able to also use the products towards process improvement. If you can see a field of view of how people are behaving and you can see how they act, you can start to predict their behavior. And so we would go down those paths in different areas, process improvement. In one specific case, one of our customers was throwing away millions of dollars of the corrugated boxes instead of putting them in the recycle bin. And it was like a $10 million savings just by capturing
Jesus.
that on video and altering the behavior of, all their locations. And so you start to pick up on stuff like that. And then you have to be careful too, because you can get too far outside your wheelhouse while you're trying to like solve things that you're not qualified for. So there's that shiny object syndrome where you have to be careful. But it was interesting. It's like, how could we think about security, process improvement in a different way? And it always involved the customer. And then it was a co-creation, collaboration where you come together and say, like, we would do 90-day, 6-month sprints. That's probably not the right word for it, but projects where we would test. We would always have stuff in our lab. We would test it at our office. And so that would be one of the things that we come in during one of the quarterly sessions, and here's our findings. And they would jump up and down, or they would go, nah, it's okay. But if they jumped up and down, it was a multi-million-dollar opportunity for us.
Yeah, well, I think one of the takeaways for people in general is how can you look at the behavior and the data that comes from your core product or service and extrapolate that into other valuable things for the client. And that's going to be obviously different across the board, but I love the idea of sort of watching the tape and seeing where process improvement could happen, right? What patterns exist elsewhere. And, in our world, in the payments world, we're looking at, transaction data and user behavior on the website, refunds, disputes, recurring billing patterns, et cetera, et cetera. All of that gives us a tremendous amount of information per client and for the user base as well. But a completely different use case than yours, but the fundamentals, I think, are look at the data. Okay, so one of the things that I think is interesting, at least from the outside, looking at your experience in that company, we've got two things. But one is you switched roles a few times. And I don't know if that was like, sort of semantics inside the company because you were working with your partner to grow it, but you started as a VP and then moved to president, then moved to CEO. Were those changes really deliberate? And what stages did they happen? Were they correlated to revenue? Were they jumps in direction? Tell me about the progress through the company's evolution that way.
Yeah. So early on, I was the front of the house leader. I like to be in front of customers, driving the revenue. And so that was probably the first half of our company. And then as we started to progress and we built out our software company with our, I like to call it an entrepreneurial seizure, which now we put millions of dollars into that product. My partner, Joseph, started to run the software company, and then I started to run our integration company. And it was just a natural progression, to go from president to CEO. Didn't really read too much into titles. I would always tell our people, I only care about my title in two scenarios. If we're trying to win business, it helps us because if the CEO shows up to a meeting, it means something. And then if a customer is really pissed off, I'll hop on the phone and own it. So that's the only two times I really cared about my title.
You mentioned the software company, Sight Owl. And so I think the natural progression of most businesses is you continue to try to look for how to make the processes more streamlined. And in today's world, you're kind of looking at what off the shelf stuff exists. And right now you can start to play with AI to build your own stuff. But realistically, the complexity of what is involved for enterprise level solutions, good luck trying to vibe code that shit.
Yeah.
You can probably vibe code some little apps right now, but you're still looking at big software development undertakings. So, and by the way, I think that's all in the future. But back out a few years, you hit a point where you decided you wanted to spin up an entire software company, own P&L, own process, to the extent that you said you split with your partner and he ran one, you ran this one. I mean, you were still together, but tell me about the journey with Sight Owl, and more specifically, how did you decide that this was a worthwhile distraction
Yeah.
versus a shiny object?
The fundamental premise of what we're trying to solve was, how do we keep track of all of our shit? Like, we had customers with thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of devices, and there was literally, Brad, there was nothing on the market. The Monday.com, the Asana, they're all project management software, right? And we needed something specific to, if a tech rolls into a building and the camera's down, where? Sometimes you walk into a site, location could have 1,000 cameras. Where's the visual representation of where it's down? You could label
So
it.
just for your techs, forget about the client themselves in terms of tracking it. For your techs, when you wanted to support it, you didn't have an easy way to diagnose and see.
We didn't. And then none of our manufacturers built it. They had a semblances of different type of things you could import, a PDF, a floor plan, but it just wasn't enough. And so we went down the path. We kept track of all of our stuff in Excel back in the day.
Good God.
Yeah. And so it got to be too much. And so we built it out. The first, 3 or 4 versions of it were just absolute shit. And then I give Joseph a ton of credit because he went all in. We built the product with developers all over the world at probably 1/4 the cost of what it would have cost us had we used all US developers. We had developers in Russia, Germany, we had everywhere. And, instead of taking ownership distributions, we just funnel the money on over to the software. And just like other entrepreneurs, you have no idea if it's going to be successful or not, but it became big enough to where we said, hey, this is something that we think could be a viable product and others might want. And it turned out to be true.
Did you build it with that in mind from the beginning, or did you sort of stumble upon that eventually?
It was built out initially as our potential competitive advantage. And it just felt bigger than that. It just felt bigger than another division of our company, completely different segment, although related. Software as a service is completely different than an integration company, as you know, but it did not start out that way. It started off as like, how do we keep track of our shit?
I hear a lot of founder stories that are scratching their own itch.
Yeah.
And it evolved into a product. We have a full-time development team in-house, and everything that we build, I think about how do we make sure that this is something that could be a white labeled product?
Yeah.
Meaning I could sell it to other people for them to use it for their own purposes. But if you don't do that from the beginning, retooling it to do that can be kind of a bitch. Did you hit a point where you were like, oh shit, we want to take this to market to sell it to other people? And then you were like, we have to redo a bunch of stuff in order to do that. Or was it sort of tooled effective from the beginning?
So I'd say it's fairly tooled effectively. The number one thing was making sure that the software didn't go down. So if you get a customer's devices up and live, like, it has to work. It can't maybe sometimes work. But early on, we dropped a couple times, and really, God bless our people, because our technicians were the guinea pigs, right? They would go out. Sometimes the software would drop offline. They would go out and map out a customer site, and then all the devices would drop off, and they would come back to the office and want to wring our necks. But all credit goes to our people.
Looking back on this now, Sight Owl, what was the biggest value proposition of it? Was it that it increased the margins in your own business, the valuation of your own business, or was it the value of it as a standalone company and what you made off of it?
So I definitely think it helped 360 separate from the competitors, because we could show I mean, the fundamental premise was, how do we reduce friction? How do we give customer the data they need immediately? If something drops offline, how can they tell us immediately and we get it back up? So the fundamental premise is, how do we reduce the friction? So from a value standpoint, when we presented our value proposition, we could say, this is how we track our projects on the front end. This is how we monitor projects during the process. And this is how we'll monitor stuff after the project. And by the way, we will have very specific device history of anything that's ever been installed by us. Regardless if a technician is with us, we will have the data. And so every time that device is touched, we'll know it. And so will you. And really the big thing too, one of the bad habits of our industry was the integrator liked to keep all the data close. So basically the customer is a prisoner. And that always used to piss me off. It's the customer's data. They paid for it. And more times than not, even the larger customers never knew when it was installed, how old it was, because these are all technology products that need to be refreshed every 3 to 5 years. But then moving over from a value proposition, the true value was SiteOwl being stood up as a separate company, going down its own path, and then 360 with a very close parallel path. If that answers your question.
It does. So a lot of value in both there. Well, I want to talk about kind of the process of selling also. But before I do, I have to scratch my own itch, because you're talking about it from the sort of security industry perspective, right? You use the term integrator, which is in this case the company that comes out and integrates all the security shit into a business.
That's right.
From my perspective, from small business guys' perspective, I just like dope security systems because they're fun and I can spy on people.
Yeah.
And set up, a different way. I can monitor the activity in the building. And for me, I'm a real estate guy, so I've got a whole bunch of properties and a whole bunch of cameras all over the place. But I have a very light version of what you're talking about. Give people an idea, for the small business owners out there, and maybe you have opinions on this, maybe you don't. The systems that make sense to use when you need, 5 to 50 cameras versus your enterprise clients, which you might need, 1,000 cameras.
One of the great things about technology is how affordable the stuff is now. I mean, I've got stuff on my home that 10 years ago would have been $150,000. So from a small business owner's perspective, most of everything's up in the cloud now. You can literally plug a camera into a switch and then see it on your phone. Very high resolution, super clear, color by day, black and white by night. It can flip over to IR mode. And a lot of cameras out there are color by night too, but black and white's actually better at night. But from a perspective of cost, I mean, you can have something for $5,000 to $10,000 pretty quick. That's just like really high quality stuff.
What are a couple of brands that you trust today in the end of 2025 from that perspective?
There's a brand called Ahua, H-U-A-H-U-A. Even like the big boys in our industry is a camera brand called Axis, A-X-I-S. And they make all different tiers of products, but those are the top two off my head. All the other stuff that we would sell is super high-end enterprise level stuff that a everyday small business owner probably wouldn't relate to. It wouldn't make sense economically.
Sure, yeah. So we'll dig into, AI in a bit here, and privacy inevitably comes up when you talk about AI. From a security perspective, when you're putting cameras all over the place, I have general concerns with, using sort of the off-the-shelf Google products and having them control the camera feed, et cetera. We use Unify in a bunch of places.
Okay.
Which has local storage, and then it pushes from your server to your phone, so nobody else is accessing the data. How do you feel about the privacy concerns with video streaming on premise for people?
Yeah, privacy is a big deal. I could tell you the only products that we ever sold, we would have our engineers vet all the encryption this is where it gets a little bit over my head technically, but there's like 3 or 4 levels of encryption.
Me too.
Yeah, 3 or 4 levels of encryption. And especially like our larger clients, it would have to have the top tier of encryption in order to be able to put it on their site. But from a security perspective, it's definitely an issue, especially in this day and age where everything is going up to the cloud. It's like, where's the cloud? Like,
Yeah.
where is it? Like, and oftentimes they would want to go see the data centers. So we would go we fly clients, and our really large clients had their own data centers and very large IT departments that even we weren't allowed to go in certain rooms. But yeah, security is a big deal now. The Sony movie studios in California was shut down for a week because of a breach. Like, that seems just crazy. You know?
It does. And I think, what's interesting to me about the whole privacy and security concerns are, for every story that you hear like that, there are who knows how many where you didn't hear about it and nobody knows,
Yeah.
right? Somebody gets access and there's just a leak, right? Somebody just has access to it. And in today's world too, once you have that, if that stuff gets sucked into, an AI engine that's processing it all, it's gone. Like it's proliferated immediately and used immediately in a million ways. Yeah, that stuff's terrifying to me. Okay, so talk to me about exit. So how did you prep for exit? When I think about the different paths that I see entrepreneurs go, I think that the ones that are bootstrapped usually stumble into sale if they do it at all. And then the ones that are funded that don't fail, which is a huge portion of them, are guided through the exit process, right? And they have sort of a board that's looking at all the terms and they're very familiar with it, right? The investors that took money in the first place, the whole thing is teed up for exit. So they're grooming the company to be ready for exit. I'm guessing that you fall somewhere in the first camp on this and sort of figured out exit as you went. But did you premeditate the exit or was it presented to you and you went from there?
No, that's a good question. So we were probably somewhere in the middle of that. It was the summer of 21. COVID was really hard. Like, that was such a hard year for us because we're a project-based business, right? And so a lot of our projects stopped. We've been doing it at the time for 18 years. And so summer 2021, we partnered up with a broker just to see what's out there. And man, it took off like fast. And it was shocking because you always think your company's worth something, right? As entrepreneurs, we think our companies are worth a lot more than they actually are.
Usually.
And to get that validation, so we found some key people that specialized in M&A in our space. And so he put the right people in front of us. Turned out, timing is so important in exits. God, it's important. But money was hot in 2021. Money was really hot. Consolidation, private equity, big deal. And so we had 5 LOIs from different companies that wanted to buy us, which we didn't even know if that was a big deal or not. Turns out after the fact, 5 LOIs is like incredible, but we had no idea what we were doing from that perspective. They would use all these terms of holdback and earnout and cash-free, debt-free. And I'm literally writing down these terms on these meetings going, I don't know what that means. I'm not sure what that means either. And so we're learning on the fly. All these big boys have M&A teams that's all they do. So it's me and my business partner learning on the fly, negotiating against really sophisticated finance people. It was so hard, man. It was so hard.
What advice do you have for entrepreneurs that are walking into that process?
Number one, communicate with your family. Daddy's going to be a little bit in outer space for the next few months. It doesn't mean he doesn't love you, but it's literally like, Brad, it's literally like you're basically starting another company. It's a whole process while you're continuing to run your company, because if the deal falls apart at the end, you still have to have something to continue to run. That's the first one. Also, that is really important to me, Brad, too, is Like I've got at this point, a 19-year history with my business partner. Uh, his wife and my wife are friends. We've traveled all over the place together. And my vision was at the end of this transaction, his family and my family will be on the beach playing together, no matter what.
Mm.
And that really helped because there were some stressful times of we didn't always agree on everything there towards the end. And, it was tough. But the North Star was, we talked about relationships. They matter. They matter way more than money. Way more than money.
Man, I think that's such a valuable thing for people to think about as they set goals. If you aren't clear in your absolute musts and your absolute must nots, it's very easy to drive towards a goal to the detriment of something that's very important to you. And if you don't have that qualifier going into it, you're likely to do that. So the idea of having the North Star being and the vision being not just exit, but after exit, I'm going to be sitting on the beach with our families enjoying it, likely was the key decision that allowed you to preserve the relationship through the process. You had kind of an interesting exit because you sold two companies independently at the same time at, from what I heard, two times the going value of these companies.
Yep.
And there was some sort of odd equity split with you and your partner through that process. Flesh in the details for what I just said, and then we'll talk about some of the levers.
Yeah. So we sold our integration company to a private equity firm that owned a door hardware company. So if you think door hardware, old, musty industry, they wanted to be able to offer integration, newer technology stuff to all their customers. And so they started an integration division and they started acquiring security integrators. And so one of us had to stay on board to continue running the company. And the only thing that was going to work was I had to sell my interest in the software company back to my old business partner. Otherwise, there would have been a massive conflict of interest. And it turns out about 9 months after the sale, the CEO said, had I not done that, they wouldn't have bought us.
Where does the conflict of interest come in?
So the conflict of interest is we've sold the integration company to the private equity group. They want us to continue to grow in partnership with the other 75 branches. It's $1 billion company. What happens if something goes sideways on Side Owl and Will needs to jump over back into his Side Owl company and now he's not helping 360 grow? And so that came up a couple times with a few people that gave us LOIs. And I just decided to sell my interest back. And so the bizarre part was I was selling with my business partner and then also against him simultaneously. It was super weird.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so I was negotiating directly with Joseph for what we deemed to be the value of Side Owl at that time. So
Because you were selling your shares in it
back
to him.
Right. And then, but we were also selling 360, which we both wanted max value for. And then the only way I wanted to do it is if they both closed on the same day, which I don't know why I came up with that. Now that I think about it, it just made sense back then. I don't even know if that makes sense now, but I just knew once I had sold everything, I no longer would have any say so. So it was like, I wanted to get all the stuff.
Clean sweep.
We had 6 attorneys working on this thing simultaneously. It was exhausting.
Good God, one is too many.
6. Yeah. After like the 5th month, I'm like, oh, why do I think the world's about to end? Oh, I've been talking to attorneys for 6 months. only covering worst case scenarios.
How would that change today with the number of attorneys? Knowing that, I mean, today, like I look at just the last year for me, how much I send to ChatGPT or Grok versus an attorney. And my first stop is upload that shit into the LLM and ask it to audit it because it can go through and audit it and it makes mistakes, but so does my attorney. And it's a lot cheaper and faster to use the robot. Do you think you still would have had 6 if you were doing the acquisition today? How would the landscape change for you today if you were to sell relative to attorneys and usage of AI?
So I think what would change today is any new company I start will be built from the beginning to sell. Whereas we never really had any intention of selling. It was just kind of something we were looking into. It turned out to be the right time. The numbers kept going higher and higher and higher. I was like, oh my God. But I think I would at least do a lot of preliminary stuff with ChatGPT, Grok, whatever, just to get a basic understanding. So you don't waste a lot of time. I think sometimes you waste a lot of time with attorneys where they're trying to give you the basics. And so I'd say, like, from a foundational level, I would always start with, help me understand what this document is, what I'm reading, show me all the areas that I could really get caught off guard, and then come into a meeting with the attorney prepped and ready with questions versus burning 5 hours of foundational discussions.
Yeah. Super helpful. What do you think the biggest levers were in increasing the value? So you sold at 2x what the market going rate was. What were the 2 or 3 levers that allowed it to be 2x?
So we could clearly articulate how we were different. We could clearly articulate how we were running our company. We could clearly articulate how we actually did culture in our company and why it mattered and how it impacted our really low turnover rate. I'll never forget the time we had probably 3 different groups. They wanted to come to our office. It was always after hours because you can't have a bunch of people in suits walking through your office. You know, we're a blue collar company, right? They came into our office and they looked like tourists because in our office, we had pictures of people. We went all in on culture, core values, but it was pictures of people all over our walls. And they were like, what are you guys doing here? What's going on here? Can we take these pictures? Like, what is this this wall of books? I'm like, we're having fun. Like, we're here to have fun, right? And so, like, we take our business very seriously, but doesn't mean we have to take ourselves seriously. So it was really a premise of, but how could we have fun and do business at the same time? And it turned out we didn't build it like that because we thought it would help us sell, but it turned out that when people came in, like Brad, if you walked into our office and you're not in the industry, you wouldn't even know what we did. There weren't like security cameras hanging all over the place. It wasn't this technical thing. It was people first, equipment second. And so I think because we could clearly articulate it, we used, EOS to run our company. So we had a clear rhythm of forecast, look ahead. We could articulate our numbers. Our financials were like super clean. For all of you out there that are looking to sell your company, you will not get max value unless your financials are extremely clean. So those are a few things.
Culture, process, unique identifier.
Yeah.
And being able to very clearly articulate those. I like those because I can remember CPU.
Yeah.
I think that culture and values are something that most entrepreneurs think they're supposed to do, and then they hang something on the wall and point to it, as a friend of mine has said. When did you learn in the journey that culture and values were actually an amplifier and driver and not something to point at on the wall?
10 years in, we came up with an acronym, SOLID. And just like you just said with the CPU, we put it in a word so we could remember it. And it was, I could tell you to this day, and everybody in our company, I could stop them in the hallway, they could say it: serve others, outstanding attitude, learn and grow, incredible initiative, and dream big. Like, those are our 5 core values. And I would use them everywhere, every day. Somebody would come in and we would be talking about somebody. I'd say, well, which core value are they showing? Which one's lacking? In our all hands meetings, we'd give away challenge coins that we stole from the military. And so somebody would get up and nominate another person based on the core value. And we had it everywhere. And then we took each letter and put each letter up on the wall of, like, what's an example of serve others? What's an example of learn and grow? The learn and grow wall was books, all the books that we read as a company. We did a dream big wall, which we put everybody's goals in writing, 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year on the wall. And that was, when I came up with that idea, people were like, you're going to do what? You're going to do what? And so I taught people how to write their goals, and They friggin' loved it. And so that was not built out to help us sell, but it turned out it was kind of like it turned out it was something that helped us sell for max value. But what it did was it made our company all about our people. It's like, if we want to get everything that we want, how do we make sure that our team gets what they want? Because I know culture gets so overused, but it mattered. It mattered that people were growing, that people felt like they were seen and heard. They were not just an object. So that's some of the things I think about culture.
I love that. I also, when I think about goals, I think about sort of the framework, and you said something very similar, the framework of, if you can help people get what they want, it can help you get what you want functionally. And in some roles, to me, that makes a ton of sense. And I think, like in sales, for example, in a very commission-oriented environment, it's like, yeah, if you have a personal goal, let me help you make more money here, because that will contribute towards your personal goal. In other roles, I have a harder time mentally connecting, somebody's personal life goal to the company goal. How do you think about those things, and where does that come in on a daily basis when you're managing customer service, tech support, administrative people, et cetera, where they've got these external personal goals and it's on the wall in the company, but it probably doesn't align directly with the company goal?
I've thought about this a lot over the years, Brad, and it's really, if you communicate with people on their frequency, you're much more likely to connect. It's really understanding on a deep level, like, what motivates people. And it turns out making more money is not always the biggest motivator. It's almost always that for salespeople, but for different roles, it's, I want certainty in my role. I want to know what's expected of me. I want to be acknowledged when I do a good job. Each person's brain and heart work at different levels, different vibration levels. And if you run a company with intention, where you're trying to seek that out, you'll find it. If you care about running a great company, because there's so much mediocrity in the world right now, it's just gross. But it takes a lot of energy, and you cannot rush greatness. You can't. It takes time and patience, and heart, love above all, life philosophy of expecting people will do the right thing. If given an opportunity in an environment, like 9 times out of 10, people are going to do the right thing. And for the 1 out of 10, you learn and you move on.
Let's talk about the next chapter. So you sell, and I think that, the notion of you sail off into the Caribbean sunset for most entrepreneurs is not real. And as we started, you mentioned that yesterday, that you haven't been doing a business for 3 years and now you're itching to do something, but you have been doing quite a few things. And a lot of people immediately when they sell freak out and either get depressed, or they're like, what do I do with the money? How do I deploy it right away? And one of the things you did is you joined Justin Donald, who's a great friend of mine, longtime friend, his group. And we were in Austin together, all in a room a few weeks ago. And one of the things he said was, most people join the group and they're looking for the deal flow, and they're looking for, how do I learn how to get the best investments and leverage the group to invest in the best things? And Will came in the group and he did no investing for the first year. He had no deals that he was a part of. What were you doing? And how did your journey into investment start post exit?
For 20 years, head down, both eyeballs in both of our businesses, I didn't really know a lot about investing. But what I did know was I wasn't just going to wire over millions of dollars to my legacy financial advisor so they can give me these 30-year projections of what my money could look like. That seemed boring. That seemed old. But I also didn't understand private alternate investments. So that felt really scary. So the way I fill the gap is through education. And I think about groups. Justin and I happen to have a couple mutual friends, both actually in Strategic Coach, ironically. I was just asking. In fact, Kerry Oberrunner did his audiobook. I was hitting golf balls on the range and I was listening to the book and I was like, that's my friend Kerry interviewing Justin. Like, wait a minute. And so I was like, what's the deal with this group? And so the first year was, again, back to the terms. You talk about every 3-letter acronym out there from SPV to like, I mean, just like every time somebody would say these terms, I'm like, I don't even know this language. And so I was like, I have to understand what I'm doing before I start zinging money all over the place. And so that's what I did. I was also still inside 360. So I wasn't super active in the group, but I had to understand the terms. I had to understand like what's a diversified portfolio for my family. What does that even mean? What are the different sectors out there in the market? You know, like sectors, like what do you mean sectors? You know, and so I had to understand that. And like, I'm just the kind of guy, like I have to know what I'm doing. And it took me 20 years to earn this money. I'm not going to just spew it off. I can hop on a plane and go to Vegas if I want to light money on fire.
Right. If you want to put it all on black.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, quite honestly, you started by saying you didn't want to give it to your legacy advisor, which is putting it on black.
Yeah.
You didn't want to, throw it into some alternative investment because you felt like that was putting it on black. Also might have been. And a year later, so you go through learning, and what people in the group know you for now is at least one of many things, and kind of the reputation that I got from you is putting this ridiculous deal vetting engine in place on the back end to really, really thoroughly vet the things you get into. Tell me about how you approach any investment you get into now, and what the steps are to see if it's a worthwhile deal.
Onboarding an investment is very similar to onboarding a new employee, onboarding a new customer. There's things that happen beforehand. There's things that happen at the beginning, during, and after. And every investment's got a life cycle. And so I have to understand what the company does, how they make money at its very core, at like a really 5th grade level. You deliver this, you get paid for that, and walk me through that. And then all the nuances of timing, right? Because investment's about timing. Is I put my money in here, it comes out this way in this format, and what are the ways in which it might not come out? And tell me all the ways in which things can go off the rails. And really, I was actually working on it this morning, Brad, because from the retreat, I pulled like 6 or 7 new questions that I added into it. And it was really a function of, in the beginning, I wasn't quite sure which questions to ask. And then I spent 5 to 10 hours going back and forth with ChatGPT on, here's my questions, back and forth. What are we missing? Okay, why is this question important? All right, get rid of this one. And it was a function of, the questions are all extremely direct. I'm not looking for a buddy. Every dollar I send out has to come back more than $1. Otherwise, what was the point? Coming into the 4th year in the group now, I now have money coming back out of some investments that I have to go back and redeploy. And so it's interesting to have that lens now of, I've got 2 calls today of investments I'm looking at, and they're going to get the spreadsheet.
So for anybody that's like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, investments, auditing, questions that you ask people. So you've got a whole litany of different things you can invest your money in. But let's say, it goes anything from somebody tells you that they're going to build out a fourplex and they need money to do it, to I have an oil and gas fund, to I have a solar company that I want you to invest in, to hey, I've got an opportunity to buy into XAI, to whatever, you name it. And you can invest in any category, and there are companies out there that will facilitate that. And usually it's somebody that's running the investment and then raising money to do it. So any of these things come across your plate, your first step is to send them a big ass spreadsheet of questions. That's my basic understanding. So tell me just what are some of the things that you're checking for on that? And you said they're going to get the spreadsheet, and that's what you're referencing.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
what are a few of the questions and some of the basics that you're trying to audit when you are looking into an investment?
So the first section is like all about the sponsor and the team.
Meaning the company that is running the investment. So the GP of the investment.
Yeah. And so it gets to a point now where if we just use something very basic like multifamily, right? The real estate investment. How many years have you and your team been doing this? 1 year, 3 years, 25 years? Were you doing something else last year? And so everything is around probability and risk. I think in terms of like qualitative and quantitative, when I look at deals too, is like you're going to be in a relationship with these people for 3, 5, 7 years. Will you enjoy that? That's the qualitative part. You can usually get that off the presentation. How much time did they spend on this presentation? Are these slides? There's a typo in the slide. There's a typo in the last 3 slides. That's that kind of stuff drives me nuts. Then it's like company and entity structure, financial transparency. I got this from Bo, 3 years of audited financials. He won't invest in a deal. Bo with the DLP, one of our real estate groups that we invest in, 3 months of audited financials. And then it's down to the deal. Tell me specifics about the deal. I put my money in. When's the capital calls? When does the money start coming out? How are you calculating NAV, net asset value? If your NAV goes down, do my distributions go down? Like all these things that I've kind of learned over the past 3.5 years that have actually happened are now baked back in there. Goes down to reporting and communication. I will not invest in anything if they don't send out at least a quarterly report of what's going on. You have to tell me what's going on. Otherwise, I'm not interested. And then it's worst case scenarios, compliance stuff. But it's like 67 questions. It's interesting too, because the really good sponsors will be like, wow, these are great questions. Let's get on these and we'll get right back to you. The other ones are like, take 3, 4, 5 days and like I'm immediately done. I'm out. So how long they take to get back to me, and then how detailed they are with the questions or with the responses. Or are they annoyed? Are they irritated that I'm asking all these questions? If they are, that's like a major red flag. But more times than not, I'll send this beforehand, I'll get it back, and then I'll pick out the 4 or 5 things, and that's the agenda for our meeting. It's evolved over time. I don't know if I would have been when I first started. I don't know if I've been bold enough to ask these questions because they're super direct. But once you wire the money, you're kind of done. Like they don't want your opinion. You're not going to their board meetings. You're not going to sit in a strategy meeting. So like, and above all, this gets over said a lot, but it can't be ignored. The sponsor over everything. If the sponsor is a good human, how will they react when things aren't going well? And then the investment second, because I've got a lot of money with one sponsor and 3 or 4 different investments. And so that top section of the sponsor, I would just pull out and be like, all right, has anything materially changed in your company? Executives in or out? Okay, cool. Now let's talk about the investment.
Yeah, I think the parallels here are, you hear people say, bet on the jockey, not the horse.
Yep.
Bet on the entrepreneur, not the business. First and foremost, it is who is running the show, right?
Yep.
And do you have confidence in them?
Yep.
I love that. Well, Will, I want to learn from your investment strategy, and I want to see your spreadsheet.
I'll send it to you for sure.
That'd be amazing. Where can people find out more about you if you want them to find out more about you?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Will Duke, I appreciate you carving out time.
You got it, buddy.